Ryan, we're back for an emergency broadcast on the Odyssey because there's obviously a dearth of right-wing podcasters giving their takes on this movie. Well, where to begin? Right, so I wrote a review on the Odyssey on keithwoods.com. That's .com now, not .pub, by the way.
Moving up in the world.
Yeah. Eat, Pray, Sail. Quite like that title. But like I said at the start of that review, right? I wanted to not like this movie. Like, I wanted it to be a failure, but I was expecting to enjoy it. Because I am actually a fan of Christopher Nolan. I think you are as well. We both rate Interstellar especially quite highly.
Well, I call myself an ex-fan now. I saw the last 4 films in IMAX, and I think they've got gradually worse. I was very disappointed after Oppenheimer. It was very phylosomatic, and I was very surprised by the glowing reviews universally, and this was even worse. It's barely even the Odyssey anymore. It's a grand departure from the true values of Homer, which is the foundation of Western civilization, and it went beyond all my expectations and was even worse.
Yeah, well, we can get into that, but let's start with the origin of the big shutout online, which was the casting. And like I said, I would have been critical of this movie regardless. But if I enjoyed the movie, if I thought it was a good movie, I probably would have just been silent, apart from making fun of the ridiculous casting choices. But actually, it was just, I thought, a really bad movie. But the casting is actually one of the big reasons. Like, this is not a secondary thing that he had to satisfy for political reasons or something. It really does spoil immersion in the movie. And it's also a lot worse than I think any of us thought it would be, than the worst Nolan haters were predicting. And weirdly enough, when it came out, people were saying, oh, there's only 4 or 5 minutes of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy, and Ellen Page's character. They just get a few minutes of screen time. But it's actually much worse than that, because Sinan, Ellen, or Elliot Page's character, is actually a pivotal character to the story. Opens the movie and then has that super important scene in the middle with talking to Odysseus from Hades, which is meant to deliver an important moral lesson. But then you also have characters that weren't really talked about. This guy, I think his name is Himesh Patel, as Odysseus' right-hand man, who's in the movie apparently for about a third of the screen time. You have a super multiracial ship crew belonging to Odysseus, right? You've got an East Asian guy there, there's an African guy there, the Indian second in command, and then even the suitors, there's an African there among the Trojan soldiers, obviously Helen of Troy. So it's really sprinkled throughout this movie. There isn't like an important act where these characters don't feature heavily. And obviously, I mean, just aside from the political problems of this, that, it's obviously encouraging white erasure with this foundational European epic, but it really spoils immersion in the movie. Like, people talk about this and they're like, oh, it should now bring your politics into it. But it's like, it's one thing if this was a play or some kind of modern interpretation of an old story. But Nolan himself has set the standard that he's going out of the way to have realism, and he said he wouldn't let people wear Uggs on set and all this kind of thing, and he was trying to think of super realistic ways to make this like the Bronze Age. And on top of that, you have a story which the background for it is how fatally perilous it is to try and navigate even a small pocket of the Mediterranean in the Bronze Age. And then you have people that somehow from all around the world have wound up on Odysseus' ship. So it totally kills the immersion. Like, it's much worse than the chuds could have imagined.
I mean, this is political for me. I'm a European man from the Western heroic tradition, and it's a total inversion of the heroic. Matt Damon is awfully cast as Odysseus. I think you were right to point out that the cheeky Sean Bean that appeared in Troy was a far more fitting casting choice. Tom Holland was awful as Telemachus. He kind of appears as like a dragon-mothered, absolute soy boy. And, you know, in the Odyssey, Telemachus travels to Sparta, and then he's told the story of Orestes avenging the murder of his father. And that gives him the impetus to, you know, help restore his father's house. But when he gets to Sparta, it's Menelaus that ancient historians have brought up looks awfully like the image of Andrew Tate. And
This was there was some Foyd historian that had this take that Menelaus is supposed to be based on Andrew Tate, and the online right was like lambasting her, but we're both kind of sympathetic to this take.
I think it's probably true.
Yeah.
And
well, it is a very intentional choice, because who else in the movie, or who in the Bronze Age has like a totally bald head and then the full beard, and kind of has a darker complexion as well,
skin tone, yeah.
Yeah. And of course he's, you know, objectifying Helen, and you know, he's this
yeah, she's a beaten woman. She's got scars on the side of her face. And it just seems as though Christopher Nolan is a complete feminist simp. I mean, his success, there are actually three in the Nolan clan. There's his brother Jonathan, who is a contributor to the writing and the ideas. And his producer is his wife, who goes by her maiden name, Emma Thomas, is it? And I...
they met in university, right?
They met in the first week of university. Nolan invites her to the Film Society, and they're never apart since. So they've been together for almost 40 years. They have 4 children. And I believe their relationship was like the ultimate progressive English equal marriage is really how you should understand the kind of ideas that Nolan is pushing here.
Well, you gave me an interesting detail that she reworked the original Interstellar script to make Murph a girl.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan Nolan, apparently he originally wrote it as a son, and Christopher Nolan's wife intervened and said, well, why not make it a daughter relationship? And she becomes the greatest scientist of all time. Well, you know, we know from women's achievements in science, they haven't so far lived up to what men have achieved. So yeah, it does feel a bit unrealistic at the end of Interstellar, but you know, this is just cinema now. Women are becoming far more involved as directors, screenwriters. You know, there are many feminist films now. Young girls are being raised on Frozen, which has a very feminist plot. You know, Celine Song, the Korean, and many other films. Hamnet came out this year also. Very feminine film. I wouldn't say it's feminist, but it's, you know, in the feminine world very much. And this is becoming an increasing feature of Hollywood films.
Yeah, well, let's get into the movie. I mean, so I said like Odysseus as Nolan presents him, he's a hero for the therapeutic age. And it's really unimaginative what he's done, in that he's taken this character that is very interesting and multi-layered as presented by Homer. You know, he has elements that are egotistical and selfish, and you know, even puts his own men's lives at risk. Obviously, the story with him having the hubris to go back and deliver his name to the Cyclops is the best example, because it gets them cursed and causes all these problems. But Nolan has just kind of collapsed everything into a very common kind of Hollywood trope or archetype of basically the kind of grizzled, pensive American war veteran. And that's how Damon plays him. And yeah, I thought the casting, I mean, outside of the diversity hires, was very poor as well. Holland is the worst example. I mean, just wooden and bland. But Damon was very poor as well. But it's hard to know how much you even blame Damon for that, because this is how Nolan wrote the character. He's just this grizzled, like, Vietnam War vet who's basically the entire movie kind of processing his guilt. And that's the worst thing about the movie is, apart from anything else, it's just not very fun or entertaining, right? I mean, they kind of cycle through these plot points that Nolan feels like he has to take off. And it's kind of episode by episode, but it never has this epic feel because it doesn't really feel like there's any world outside of, you know, the immediate vicinity of what the characters are encountering at any one time. And it's supposed to be this, you know, sprawling epic across the Mediterranean, but all you really see is kind of the coastlines that they land on and then run from, stretches of sea and the inside of his palace in Ithaca. So it never feels like this, like I said, sprawling epic that he had a huge budget to deliver on. And he kind of cycles through these episodes, and some of them, you know, some of them you could tell his heart wasn't really into it, and he had to get through it. You know, he tried to do obviously the Great Sea Monster without any CGI, and it was a little bit lacking, and he kind of rushed that scene a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's all, you know, it's all there really to build up to this climax of Odysseus dealing with the suitors, and even that doesn't really land. I mean, I found it had no emotional core to it at the end. Like he gets reunited with Telemachus, and you know it's Matt Damon and Tom Holland with these flat expressions, and then they move on, and you get this very, I thought, disappointing climax scene as well with the, you know, at least in the story you have kind of a resolution to Telemachus's arc where he helps his father dispatch the suitors. In this, he doesn't even do that, right? He tosses him a weapon from the roof, and basically the whole arc of Telemachus is like he gets bullied and shouted down by his mother and the suitors for the whole film, has this very lackluster, flat reunion with his father, tosses him a sword at an important point of the movie, and then gets made king. Like, no one has a satisfying arc. I mean, Odysseus, this is the whole thing. Nolan's Odysseus really has no arc. Like in Homer, he has an excess of certain virtues, you could say, or he has traits that are misapplied. And he basically learns the lesson of the proper place to use his martial excellence, which is in defense of his home and of his family, and he becomes a more rounded person. And obviously that's the core of any good story, is that there's a, satisfying, progressing, logical character arc. Well, the arc in this, basically, as we find out at the end, is that he's super guilt-ridden for Troy, and he's all guilty and pensive for 3 hours. And then he processes his guilt by, I guess, speaking it out. He has a scene where he expresses his guilt to his wife and reaches out for the apparition of Athena, which it turns out is probably just... at least this is my theory, is just a kind of PTSD projection of his guilt. And once he's kind of processed it and he's lived back through the events of the sack of Troy, she disappears. So essentially his whole character arc is that he's a guilty, mournful guy for 3 hours, and I guess eventually processes his guilt and then leaves Ithaca. So there's no real character progression there.
Yeah, and all the real lessons of the Odyssey and Iliad are almost completely left out, apart from the idea of homecoming. Even the notion of oikos, the restoration of the Lord in his home, is kind of subverted because he doesn't even take the throne. He just sails off into the sunset with his wife because it's what she wants to do. Well, that's the implication. And the film just completely strips out all these lessons that, are basically created by wise men, bards, to increase cultural, social, political complexity. I mean, Xenia is obviously a big part of the film, and the right level of hospitality to travelers, strangers, because they might be a god. But, in Greek mythology, that is clearly aiding social complexity and trust in the Aegean, because everything's moving through by ships, and, trade and high trust is needed. And, these things really matter. A great thing that was left out is Troy is destined to be destroyed because Paris chooses Eros over power and wisdom. So Paris has to choose from the three goddesses, Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena. And he chooses Aphrodite, which is his lust. So Troy is destined to fall because of Paris's choice. And also because the Trojans didn't pay their debts. So King Priam's father had Poseidon build the impregnable walls, and Poseidon was never paid. So again, that talks about like commercial trust. And, there are just so many lessons that are left out.
I mean, you are shutting out a little bit, though. It is shutting out a bit to be, going through all of the Homeric virtues and complaining that Christopher Nolan isn't like making this some great morality tale for men of the West.
Yeah, he's up against it. It is a complex story. A lot of it is told in the original text is told through the Phaeacians when Odysseus lands there. I mean, why don't we talk about the very start?
Well, I don't know. This is all just like I don't know. It's very. I think it's a bit pretentious to go through all of the like Homeric virtues and want this classical tale. I mean, obviously if you're gonna have a modern adaptation in IMAX as a big like $1.2 billion blockbuster, okay, it's not gonna be all of these lessons in the Greek virtues, but I mean, like, let's get to the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem, apart from it being very diverse and having this awful cast, it's just very gay, right? Like,
but the gayness is the absence of the masculine virtues.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, like, I would be open to some kind of modern interpretation or, him being a bit subversive with it, but it's not even subversive in a brave way. Like, it's just the most basic boomer slop, which is like, be kind to strangers, as he said in an interview, is actually the message of the movie. War veteran archetype processes his guilt, that old trope that's been done to death for decades now. And listen to your female conscience. It's the most safe, basic, like, the post-war consensus is important. Judeo-Christian values are the foundation of civilization. And even that, it's one thing if you want to make some, Clint Eastwood style movie, Gran Torino, this kind of thing has these kinds of lessons as well. Like if you want to insert that, fine. But why do it to the Odyssey? Like all of the things you could have done with the Odyssey, and his idea was to make Odysseus of all people a kind of Oppenheimer character who's racked with guilt over war. It's just not. I don't know. It's not saying anything interesting. Like of all the things you could do with that character, like what kind of contribution is that?
Look, I'm not asking for the handmaids to be hung at the end. I'm not asking for brutal, graphic violence. I'm just asking for some of the basic lessons of Iliad Odyssey, which is the foundation of the West, which does matter to our culture. And yeah, I mean, talking about the history, the Bronze Age, in the area of the Mediterranean, during the Bronze Age, these were quite matriarchal Earth Mother pantheons. And our ancestors, the Indo-Europeans, came down and they turned the culture into a martial, aristocratic, heroic culture. And Iliad Odyssey, they represent the emergence of the individual as a named hero. And Ricardo Duchesne does a great job of speaking about this in his book, Greatness in Ruin. That's the Mycenaean culture. It's, we talk about the West as this individualism, but really it's an aristocratic egalitarianism. And, the first scene in the Iliad is an argument between Agamemnon and Achilles over the right of Briseis. And again, that's a devolution of power from the tyrant. The warriors need to be paid their debt. And all these things are stripped out, as you say, into the feminine conscience. But that is really our culture. It's the celestial gods overcoming the Earth Mother gods in that region because of the Indo-European invasion, turning it into an aristocratic, complex culture. And that's been totally stripped out. And the fact that conservatives and the general public can't even recognize that's what's being done just shows how much our culture has lost its masculinity, lost its complexity. And it's all being drawn back into this social cowardice and femininity.
Okay, but I mean, again, like $1.2 billion blockbuster, are we really expecting Nolan to tell us a story about the Indo-European warrior culture subjugating the Earth Mother? What was it? It would have been early European farmer cultures there, right? I mean, like, let's get to the basic problem. I mean, the basic message that would be interesting to explore in the Odyssey that you actually can do with a sort of modern interpretation in a blockbuster format is basically that, yeah, it's the story of Oikos. It's the contrast is Achilles and Odysseus, and Achilles chooses immortality, true glory, rather than a long, comfortable life where he was prophesied that he would, find love and have a great home life and family and so on. And Odysseus is kind of the flip side of that, where he's willing to reject immortality itself to go back to what's his, to go back to Ithaca and his own family and his own people. And, it gets to the heart of the difference between how the ancients viewed home versus the kind of impoverished view of home we have now, where there's this much more totalizing, folkish view where, you have gods within your household and within your familial lineage. And then you have, gods and laws within your city, which your family is a part of. And it's this set of kind of overlapping circles of belonging and law. But, you only have meaning not as an individual, but, coming from these things that create your familial lineage, your city, your ethnos. And that's a really interesting thing to explore, the fact that Odysseus is willing to take this other path. And although he is a very, in some ways, egotistical, or you could say lustful, glory-seeking individual, that home still has this pull on him. And of course, the really credible scenes in the Odyssey is when he encounters Achilles and Hades, who kind of gives the other perspective on that, where he says that actually he would rather be servant to the lowliest farmer and living than be king over all the people in Hades. So I think that's a really interesting thing to explore. And, people that defend this say, oh, well, you had to put it in kind of a modern, friendly, moral lesson. But it's like, Troy, all the problems that movie had in 2004, it was able to present some things that were a bit, kind of against our modern ethos, even in the character of Achilles, and that he does choose a life of war and glory over a long, comfortable life. I think the Odyssey could have been really interesting as an exploration of the flip side of that. But instead what you get is, like, Ithaca really has no meaning in this film. Ithaca is just this background thing. I mean, it's just the name of the place where his wife and son happen to live, right? You don't get this sense that he's returning to something that kind of completes him, that, that he has this longing for home. It's just like, yeah, he's got to go home and be a dad, right? He's got to fulfill his role as a suburban PTSD American dad. And of course, how does the film end, right? He gets back to Ithaca, this incredible reunion, this incredible story of Oikos. And he goes on a cruise with his wife, right? As every boomer knows, is the dream of a fulfilled life is you're going to go off and spend your retirement money and go cruising with your wife, right? And Nolan has now inserted this into multiple movies, right? That was Batman as well. Batman becomes this incredible Nietzschean overman and overcomes and imposes order and morality on the world and succeeds and turns himself into this weapon of justice. And of course, what's the payoff? He gets to go holidaying around Europe with Anne Hathaway, which is the same payoff Matt Damon gets. So I think that says a lot about Nolan's mindset approaching these things.
I mean, what about the absence of the erotic female? Like, Cersei, turns his men into pigs, and he has to sleep with her to relinquish his men. Calypso sexually enslaves him for 7 years. And it's actually said in the original text that he just sat on the rock and looked out to sea, like wanting to leave. But she kept him there. So Zeus sends Hermes to get Odysseus back on his way. But the women in the story are totally desexualized. Calypso functions as a kind of nursing figure, just giving him the painkillers through the Lotus Eater, which is kind of changed a little bit. Circe is a rape victim, well, that's the implication. That's how it's acted, and that's, how the audience will see it, surely. The handmaids, 12 of the handmaids are sleeping with the suitors and causing chaos in his home. That's excluded almost entirely. And in Hades, in the original text, Odysseus meets a procession of women. He, as well as his mother tells him about, his son who's struggling and his dying father. And then he meets a procession of women, the bad women, Epicasta, who marries her son, Euryphile, who chooses gold over devotion to her husband, Ariadne, who helps Theseus and betrays her father. And then he also meets the good women, the devoted wives, the great queens. And so much of the real text is about the cosmic order being restored through patriarchy and also Xenia. So, we get none of that.
It is interesting. They all have a kind of therapeutic role. I mean, even Calypso, when he leaves, it's just this kind of thing where they have a conversation, and she's like, "Yeah, okay, I guess I'll let you go. You're ready to go," and then she gives him this lesson, which is basically you have to learn to let go and stop trying to control things and stop trying to impose your masculine order on the world. Important lesson for Odysseus of all people. And then he, lays flat on a board and the sea transports him back to Ithaca, right? He just had to learn to let go and literally go with the flow. And then of course the, Circe as the rape victim, which I think he probably took from, there was a best-selling historical novel a few years ago called Circe, which imagined her in this way, this traumatized kind of modern female archetype. But yeah, and of course every female character in it as well is kind of like, they don't really have flaws. They're kind of perfectly virtuous, right? Like Helen is this victim of colonialism, basically, because that's another thing. Of course, we learn is of course Nolan has to desacralize everything, right? So the Trojan War was not actually about Helen of Troy's face. I'm sure Nolan saw that, and his kind of autistic mind, he has to make everything logical and make sense and put into modern terms. And so it's kind of this double thing, whereas one, he's like autistic and he wants to make it a realistic world that makes sense to him. But then also there is a kind of leftist message where it's like, she was actually the victim of a colonial war that was actually about Agamemnon wanting to secure trade routes. It was actually like a colonial, imperialist, capitalist war. And these people, Sinon, Helen of Troy, all these women and minority characters are just victims of this. And of course you see, I think it was intentional as well that they chose Benny Safdie, who's this kind of frail Jewish guy, to play Agamemnon, and at the end you see him without his armor. Of course it's like, well, behind these big colonial rulers with all these pretensions about themselves, it's just this frail, weak guy. I think that's very intentional as well. But yeah, they're, for all of the feminist writing, I mean, the female characters is very uninteresting, right? They're kind of, it's funny in a way, they're kind of more multifaceted in Homer, and in some ways more, kind of more assertive and more interesting, more sensual. In this, they're all just the same kind of, tired female therapist archetype.
Yeah. I mean, Athena is the only one of the gods that appears. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hermes are left out. Okay, it might be harder to include them, but I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, and you made a point about Athena being a kind of secularized.
Yeah, I think he wrote this movie to be totally secular. When I heard he was doing the Odyssey, I figured he's not going to have anything supernatural, and he'll exclude the gods, and probably at most you'll have, you know, storms or something that, like, maybe the people at the time could blame it on the gods, but there'll be a way you can work a secular explanation into it. I think that's exactly what he did with Athena. She's the only god or goddess you see, but she never intervenes throughout the movie, right? She doesn't intervene physically or anything. It's just him seeing her, speaking to her. And at one point we see he's talking to her, and Calypso is there and doesn't notice her. So I think she's just a projection of his guilt, and I think the proof of that is at the end, when you see he's having the flashback of Troy and he sees the Trojan girl getting beheaded. It has the face of Athena. So I think that was the projection he was seeing throughout the movie, was a manifestation of the guilt, because that was like the worst example of the excesses he saw in the sack of Troy. And, you know, at the end, after he recounts all of that and goes through his guilt, he reaches out for Athena, and the apparition is gone, and that's the last of her we see in the movie. So I think the message is, at that point, he has properly processed his guilt. For Nolan, I think that was supposed to be the end point of the character arc, that he processed his guilt and accepted that he had disobeyed Zeus's law and created this chain of events. And then she is no longer needed. He no longer needs this projection to help him process this.
Yeah, I mean, Athena's obviously the great protector of Odysseus. She is incentivized for Troy to fall. I think she inspires the idea to create the Trojan horse. Mm-hmm. She's the goddess of craft, of intelligent warfare, of wisdom. And you know, you couldn't really leave Athena out. She's integral to Odysseus as a character. But yeah, I mean, your point about secularizing her, I definitely think there's something to it. I mean, in the sack of Troy, Ajax the Lesser rapes, I think it's Cassandra, who's one of the priestesses in the temple, and then that's punished by Poseidon. He kills him on his way home. So in the original text, again and again, the gods are intervening to restore the cosmic order. But we're just left with the therapy feminism. So
yeah, I mean, you know, that's like one of the worst things about the movie is this PTSD arc he decides to give Odysseus, which I think is just so baffling. Like, of all of the things to do with that character, and again, you can reimagine aspects of the character, but it's like, this is the argument people make, is they say, oh well, number one, they say it would be too unpalatable for a modern audience to have a guy like Odysseus who, you know, some point in the Odyssey, they just, you know, casually like raid and enslave a coastal village, right? And he's too morally grey, and, you know, arguably in ways is unfaithful to Penelope and so on. But it's like, well, you know, I don't know where this idea has come from that modern audiences are so uncomfortable with morally questionable characters. I mean, if you talk about like you couldn't possibly have a protagonist who's like a vainglorious, sensual pirateer. It's like, well, the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise has made like $4 or $5 billion or something insane. But also, again, if you're adapting these things, it's like you can change elements of the story and you can make it modern. But if you want to tell a story about a guy with PTSD, like the Odyssey is not the story for that. You know, you can adapt things and make them modern, but you can't fundamentally change the character of it. I mean, it's like if you do Macbeth adaptation and it's about basically a virtuous king who has a really helpful, virtuous wife that helps him rule in the interest of everybody. Well, it's not Macbeth. Why are you adopting Macbeth for that? And it just, yeah, it takes away so much of what's interesting about this story to make him this, you know, troubled PTSD character. I wonder if Nolan is maybe just one of these kinds of directors that he seems like he can only write for one main character. You know, you see the same kind of personality profile with Odysseus and with Oppenheimer, and some of the other protagonists he's written, but it's just not satisfying.
Why do you think the conservative media ended up glazing the film completely?
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I mean, I guess what we haven't even touched on yet is how Christian this story is. You know, that's what we're kind of getting at with the guilt he feels. It's very much Nolan imposing his kind of post-Christian or post-Catholic view on it. And you kind of wonder how intentional that is. Like, in a sense, is Nolan just very kind of unquestioning of his moral premises? Like, this is something. This is kind of a calling card of Nolan. Is he creates these extremely complex artifices, and he'll have this huge, um, sci-fi lore with something like Interstellar, or with the Odyssey. I'm sure he came up with very complex ways that all of this could make sense with the Trojan horse and ways to kind of secularly explain some of the things we're experiencing. But he'll have a very simple moral message, which sometimes it works. Like Interstellar is a pretty simple message, transcendent power of love, whatever else. Um, but in this case, yeah, I mean, the message is just this basic kind of, as he said, be kind to strangers. He universalizes Xenia into basically the golden rule. Um, and I think at one point in the closing speech, near the end, they actually say that Xenia is due unto others. Right, so he's totally imposed Christian morality onto it, and then he takes out all of the aspects of pagan heroic epics that are kind of icky to a modern Christian sensibility, and then he has a very Christian message of forgiveness, a universal moral law based on universal compassion and do unto others. And you wonder how intentional is that from Nolan, or is it just he's totally unquestioning of these kinds of moral premises, and when he goes to try and write this story, he can't consider a protagonist with a different set of motivations, or he can't think of an interesting payoff that isn't kind of the old lessons of the post-war consensus. But it makes for a very flat, uninteresting story, even if you put aside it being kind of disrespectful to the source material. But the weird thing about the conservative glaze, I mean, so there's like regular conservatives that have glazed it, like the Daily Wire types, which somehow Matt Walsh is the only one holding the line. Thank you, Matt Walsh. It's like also Matt Walsh and like four or five others. But yeah, a lot of people have constructed this take as well, that it's like esoterically based, right? And what they say is, oh, this is so unlike modern Hollywood because it's a story about a masculine dad coming home, and he restores order and fulfills his role as father and kicks out unwanted invaders. And I've seen some very smart people having this take as well. I think JF thought it was a base movie, which surprised me. But the response to that is like everything people are saying in this that's subversive or against Hollywood or against modern values, it's all just the stuff that Nolan couldn't scrub from the basic story of the Odyssey, right? It's like, yeah, okay, he adapted the Odyssey and it ends with the guy coming home killing unwanted suitors in his home. Yeah, that is the Odyssey story, right? So I don't see how they're coming up with that take, because everything that Nolan has changed was changed in a subversive kind of leftist way, right? Like I said, that you've all of these characters that are basically minority victims of colonial war. And it's only the things he's left in that people are reading that into. But even in that case, it's like, they'll go, maybe it's about immigration. It's like the suitors are like the least multiracial part of the whole movie, right? Odysseus' own crew is far more multiracial. So I don't see how anyone would kind of draw those allegories. Or even people were trying to say, it's like it's about the specter of World War II and the guilt people feel and so on. That is kind of hamstringing Western man. It's like there's not even the slightest illusion that any of this is that Troy is related to World War II or something. It's not in the slightest suggested like that. It's just a basic kind of anti-war narrative.
I just think it's monumental cope. Um, I think a lot of these people are completely ignorant of the lessons of the Greek myths. I think there are a lot of incentives for social and commercial cowardice. People don't want to be the naysayer, the bad guy, the guy that calls out the feminism. I think there's some evidence the user ratings have been rigged, but there are so many small accounts on social media saying how brilliant it is. It started to feel organic to me that this was
Yeah, I think
a genuine consensus.
I think it's a genuine consensus. Yeah, I mean the critics' consensus is pretty much overwhelming. But yeah, I mean the average person I've talked to that's seen this, I mean, they think it's a great movie, which is baffling to me because, like I said, even aside from any of the diverse cast and put all of that aside, I think it's up there with Tenet as his worst movie. Maybe it's slightly better than Tenet, but I think it is so little to recommend it. The pacing is very odd. Dialogue is horrible. I mean, listen to the dialogue between the suitors and Telemachus. I mean, it's just ridiculously bad. And obviously, the line everyone has zoned in on, our age of bronze is coming to an end. I mean, that's in a way that's quintessentially Nolan, where he has this ridiculously explicit expository dialogue, but it's for some reason it's far worse in this film, and so much of it is just people explaining things. But yeah, like I said, the pacing is poor. Like I said, these episodes are they follow one another without ever really immersing you in it. None of these secondary characters are interesting at all. They're kind of just there as background to move the story along. Damon and his Odysseus is not compelling at all and doesn't really have an arc except for he's physically moving places, but like nothing is really happening with the character except for him reliving guilt, which isn't really an arc. And even the climax fight scene I thought was kind of ridiculous.
Oh, it's awful. It's
Yeah.
one of the worst final fights I've ever seen, probably the worst ever. And Telemachus just being this passive bystander is just so hard to watch.
But I think it does say something about the degree to which woke has won, because I mean, 20 years ago, if a movie like this came out and they had a trans actor, like post surgery, female to male, and then they have African Helen of Troy, and all of these other race swap characters. I mean, would conservatives have watched it and said, well, actually, no, it's super pro Western tale because of these other elements in it? I mean, maybe. I mean, I guess no one's really talking about race or anything on the conservative right 20 years ago. But at the same time, I think there would have been a sense if you said this like 4, 5, 6 years ago when there was this turn against wokeism, and some of these figures like Matt Walsh were more willing to speak out on anti-whiteism and white erasure in film and culture and so on, that it felt like that was the direction things were going in. And, the conservative right, for the most part, especially the younger ones, were going to turn against this kind of thing. And they were kind of digging their heels in. They did like the boycott of, it wasn't a Budweiser that Matt Walsh led for having the trans person in the advert. And there was just a sense of, they're starting to get aware of the white erasure that's happening in film and culture. A lot of the kind of chud YouTubers that A-Log, Disney, and these kinds of things talk about this stuff a lot now. They're willing to boycott, they're willing to be noisy about it. It felt like it was going in a direction, but now you see this, and they've all embraced it except for, like I said, Matt Walsh and a few others. It's like, in a sense, they kind of took, they went like 4 steps backward and then they took 1 step forward. But it was very soft pushback, because they will accept any of this stuff now, seemingly, as long as you're not like explicitly in their face, telling them they're evil and they should die. I mean, I don't know how he could have made it more woke and in their face, but apparently that's all you have to do.
I think people are psychologically defeated, and they're bending the knee to this kind of culture industry now. Obviously Hollywood is trying to make money. They're trying to appeal to the biggest possible audience, as universal as possible. And, the essence of these ancient stories will be lost in many of these retellings. But to the extent to which that was true was unbelievable. And I think, a lot of the consensus is now created on social media through influencers. And social media is the ultimate democracy. the problem is the polis are retarded and cowardly, and they don't want to be the ones that have the bad word to say about the thing that everyone's seeing and everyone's excited about. I mean, we spoke about James Bond a few years ago. A feminist writer cucked Bond, made him a brooding single father, and killed him. And yet there were still James Bond fans on YouTube saying, oh, it wasn't what I was expecting, but I think I'm going to see it again just so I can...
That was funny. They're like, maybe if I watch it the fourth time, I'll appreciate it.
Yeah. And you've got all these people on X now saying they're going to watch the Odyssey again in IMAX. Oh, because it was so great in 2D, and they're bragging about going to see it at 4 a.m., 6 a.m. It's just collective madness transmitted through social media, which is so influential on our lives now. Women are fully integrated into the culture. They're now power brokers. They're now consumers. They have a big say in the values that are projected in the culture industry. And this is a slop we're being served up now. And, white people are increasingly a minority. Masculine white men are an even bigger minority. And our voice is swamped by the cowards, basically.
Yeah. And people that hate the Odyssey are the ultimate persecuted minority. But even if you want to talk about the kind of radical right, I mean, there was a sense people were being very critical of it before it came out, and everyone was making fun of the casting choices. But then when it came out, there was a lot of people that were just like, well, fine, but I don't want to shut out, people trying to spin kind of, hot takes about how kind of brilliantly subversive what Nolan had done was. And it's like, you get the sense with some of them, it's like they just don't want to be, which is understandable. People just don't want to feel like they're on the losing side all the time and constantly be complaining and constantly be pointing out how bad and subversive everything is. And so people said that to me. It's like, well, the ride is, it's not like creative if we're just criticizing stuff. It's like, yeah, but it's not, you're not creating some kind of master morality by like pretending like modern liberal slop is really powerful and right wing or something. It's like that's not going to change anything in the other direction if you just embrace this stuff, right? And it's like, people are like, oh well, why don't people just go create their own thing? It's like, well, actually, even if we ignored this, it's like this is still going to be hugely influential, right? People actually want interesting, good cultural critique. But I think there's a lot of people on the radical right now that, like, after so many years of this, it's just like, well, this, like, mainstream culture is kind of lost, and this is just the direction of things, and the diversity and everything is just part of it. Like, it is to a point. I think it's just like after so many years, even people on the very kind of radical right that seem to have radical views just accept defeat in a certain way, and they may, they may hold the same beliefs, but then they get agitated by the Matt Walsh types chilling out about this stuff. Like, they don't like really any expression of it because they feel like it highlights their own powerlessness. So they want to pretend they're not powerless by, we're embracing this and we're somehow kind of part of this ride. We're part of this culture. We're like right-wing progressives that are okay with this. So we're not totally losing and getting destroyed. It's like, well, okay, maybe you're okay with it, but these people still hate you and they're still doing this to spite you, and that's not actually going to change things or subvert anything if you support it from the sidelines, right? It's like I saw Richard Spencer was like, he didn't like this movie, but then he saw that me and Martin Sellner were being critical of it, so now he thinks he likes it and he wants to defend it. It's kind of an interesting thought process. But maybe we can give him his due. I think he did have the most novel take, which seems to be his goal. He just came out and said Odysseus was a Jew, which is kind of funny. That's an interesting approach to take.
Yeah, I don't know what their beliefs are exactly. I think they think that Troy is the ultimate expression of Apollo.
I don't think there's any point.
Yeah, let's not get into it. But yeah, there are all these social media incentives, wanting to own someone else, wanting to have the opposite take of someone else.
Yeah.
And there's just so much ignorance, lack of willingness to read, learn your real tradition.
It's like the big influencers aren't even a problem, because it's like Matt Walsh has a huge audience and he can just say what he thinks because his audience agrees with him, and he's like, yeah, this is trash. It's full of diversity. Just like the based chud take, like, yeah, I didn't like it because all the brown people. It's like, yeah, it's good. Matt Walsh says that, but it's like, I mean, he can say that, right? And I'm totally honest about what I think about it. And I've been a-logging Christopher Nolan for the last week now, and I'm fine to just put out what I think about it, and people are kind of going to respond regardless. And then someone like Nick Fuentes, like Nick says he enjoyed it, that's fine. He's just going to give his take out there. The real problem is like the people where it's like the Twitter accounts with like 3 or 4 or 5,000 Twitter followers that they're like, well, I'm not like the other right wingers, right? I'm not like the other groypers. I'm not like the other nationalists. I have this super like esoteric intellectual. I'm a right wing progressive. This is the view of things I have, and they like try and like ape the contrarianism of more intelligent people. Like Spencer, to a degree, is intelligent. They kind of try and ape his contrarianism, or they try and, ape maybe like a novelty take Nick Fuentes will have. But it's like, no, actually, you are just like kind of you are just like a stupid chud that's trying to LARP as these people that actually have character. And that's like a huge amount of the Twitter right now. It's like people don't want to be part of a mass, and they want to like differentiate themselves a little bit and kind of curate their own following if they have a few thousand followers. And it's just like that typical thing of like everyone wanting to be a chief, everyone wanting to have a hot take, and people just aren't really behind, let's all shut out on Christopher Nolan for a week. It's just not very appealing to people anymore.
What did you think about the intellectual reviews from the likes of, Tom Holland, Emily Wilson? I mean, Emily Wilson, basically, if you read into her, how she...
Yeah, I didn't look at what Holland said. But yeah, I mean, the Wilson take says it all. I mean, what more do you say? I mean, she said the kind of the same things we've been alluding to, that there's no sense of heroism or glory in the film, that he just made Odysseus this kind of sad, brooding character. I mean, it says it all. Everyone assumed she'd love this super liberal feminist interpretation, but I think in her case, it's probably like, well, even if she is a super leftist and she wanted to have this leftist message, it's like, well, it would probably land better if it was a more compelling movie, or it was a bit more like the Odyssey, right? I mean, she obviously recognizes this is just, kind of modern boomer Hollywood slop.
That seemed to be the take from most of the classicists that I've seen on YouTube and clips. They were quietly critical without looking too annoyed. But Tom Holland, I've been laying into him on X. I just think he's...
Point out, you're talking about the historian, not the actor that played Telemachus. It's kind of an important...
Yeah, I'm talking about the historian, the author of Dominion. He's part of the Rest Is History podcast, very big, influential podcast. And they had a commercial relationship with the studio, and Tom Holland was invited to a preview, and he gave it the most glowing review. And I was very doubtful of that. And I didn't intend to see the film. And then I saw the Rotten Tomatoes 96% user review, and I was thinking, oh, maybe it'll be interesting. And then we spoke about seeing it on the possibility that it was really bad, and then trashing it. So I intended to keep my mouth shut if it was actually good, but
yeah, well, unfortunately, I think the chuds like us do have to take a bit of an L on this. It is projected to cross, I think, $1.2 billion, which would make it Nolan's most successful film ever. I think it's interesting as well how much it kind of shows there's still a monoculture. As much as we talk about, with the internet and siloed communities and the breakdown in traditional media, that everyone is off in their own subcultures now. But you see something like this, and even when Barbenheimer released, that was this big kind of monocultural event that everyone was talking about. Or I think it's something like the release of the last season of Stranger Things on Netflix, that you do still have these kinds of cultural moments where all of social media and all of the little subcultures and even our own little dissident subculture is all focused on this one thing. Like, in a way, there is still kind of a monoculture there, and it's actually as woke as ever.
Yeah, the big events, big commercial events, they will hit social media feeds hard. Social media is oriented to discuss these big events for days on end. And then people get FOMO. They don't want to be left out. They don't want to be left out of the conversation. And that's the culture industry now. It's universal slop. Um,
Yeah, and of course, whatever Nolan does next is going to have like unlimited budget.
yeah, I mean,
His
I'm sure
his
they'll.
feminist Anglo wife is going to have free reign.
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to give him another 500 million.
The guy will lead it up.
Yeah, they'll lap it up like a
Yeah.
saucer of milk.
Yeah, but yeah, final rating. We actually, a very rare occurrence. We came to the same rating on this. Very specific rating. We both said 3.5.
Yeah.
Isn't that correct? I'm still settled on that. I think 3.5 is the fair rating.
I was leaning towards a 4, but in the 24 hours after coming out of the theatre, I was really angry, and I thought, no, 3.5.
Yeah, it was one of the things. It's like at the end of it, it's like, oh, maybe it's like, did I watch a good movie? But the more you think about it, it's like, well, what you kind of have this empty, unsatisfied feeling at the end of this because, like I said, there's no real character arcs in it. It's just events following events. Nothing is very compelling. Nothing feels very real or emotive because of the dialogue. And it has a final message and a kind of total message and understanding that just leaves you unfulfilled because there's nothing to chew on there morally or ethically.
Yeah, if there were any highlights, you could take Cersei's character, like turning the men into pigs, as Nolan intended. I think the island is quite interesting with the lion, tiger, and the deer turning human. Also, the scene of the sirens is quite good, and the whirlpool. But there are brief highlights, but
Yeah,
overall, Nolan has defiled the Western tradition, and I just have to make that my conclusion.
yeah. Well, I would tell people not to go watch it, but at this point, I mean, who's even going to listen to us, right? But
I'm sure they've already booked their tickets.
yeah, going for the second screening in IMAX. But yeah, big woman won, big Anglo won, big Boomer won.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just us and Matt Walsh have to just hold the line and
Yeah.
hope for a better time.
Elon, if you're out there.
All right, well, that's it. We'll be back with maybe we'll review his next movie. Take care, everyone.